All right. So Brian, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So can you tell us how you solved this problem? You've come up with the answer already.
I'm still trying to come up with the answer, but to solve it, you would find the equilibrium of PB and PB and subtract that by the equilibrium of the with the text.
Yeah. And so that's the right approach. Now, so German, did you do any of that, or are you stuck, or what's going on?
Yeah, I actually did the equilibrium too.
Okay, so you did both
Yeah,
of the equilibria.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about you, William?
Same thing. I'm finding both equilibriums.
Yeah. And so German, I think your mic is, or your speakers are turned up too loud. Okay, we got a bunch of feedback. So and Hung, what about you? Are you okay with the suggested approach? Hung? Okay, maybe Hung can't hear us. But okay, so you all agree. Do you just need another minute to work it out? And I also would say, you know, my suggestion would be to graph. That's my first suggestion. Graph it so you can see it, what you're looking for. But that's just kind of a memory device. So Brian, do you just need another minute, or do you need some help?
I just need another minute. That's because I messed up in the beginning, but then I caught on.
Okay. And what about you, German? Are you good, or do you need some assistance?
How's this volume? Is this still louder?
Oh, what's that?
This is volume right now. Is it still louder?
Yo, I can hear you, but as long as I can't hear myself, it's fine. You know, it's just your speakers.
Yeah, I'll probably need a little more time just to check.
Okay. And what about you, William? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I just have to finish the math.
Okay. So I'll give you guys another minute. Okay. So I started my diagram here, and I'll ask you all. So to help me fill it out, just so we're clear. So I have the original equilibrium where we would find Q star. What did you get for Q star, Brian?
21.857.
21 for the original Q star, 21.857. What about you, German? What did you get? German? What about you, William?
I think I got a wrong answer. I think.
Yeah. So, well, okay. And William, what did you get for Q star?
For Q star, I got 9.4.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
German.
Yeah.
What did you get?
I got 13.2 initially, but.
Okay. So how did you get 13.2 for Q star?
Oh, I just did a wrong.
Okay. Well, do you know how to do it the right way? The right
way? Yeah. I looked at my mistake.
42.3.
Okay. So Q star is an intersection of. So let's go ahead and walk through this just a little bit, because this should start to become pretty second nature for you all. We have these two equations, the demand and the supply equations. We set them equal together, and then we solve for Q. Right? Is there anybody who didn't do that to find Q star? So Brian, I think that you might not have done that.
I think Q star was for my y-axis. I did get 9.428 x86 for the x-axis.
Oh, okay, you just
Yeah.
wrote down the
I
wrong
saw,
number.
yeah. I
Yeah,
thought that.
oh, okay, good. I just want to make sure everybody knows where we're getting these numbers from. So yeah, so this is gonna be 66 divided by 7, or what did you say, German, 9.41 or something?
Yeah, 9.4 kind of.
Yeah, and I would encourage you all to do 2 digits of precision. So is it like 9.41 or 9.42?
9.412.
2, okay. Yeah, and then the P star for our original equilibrium, then that becomes pretty easy, right? And usually if you just substitute it back into the supply equation, you'll get 3 in this case plus 2. And the reason why I like to do this is because normally the supply equation on these problems is a little bit easier, right? So I mean, I can see that 9 times 2 is 18 times 41 is 19.82, or excuse me, 18.82 plus 3 is 21.82. Do you all agree? Do you agree, William? Are you okay, William?
Sorry, yes,
Yeah, do you agree?
yes,
that
I
what-
do.
Okay, what about you, German? Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Brian, you agree? Everything good?
Yeah, that's what I got.
Huh? Okay, and Hung, you're fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
So now we want to introduce the tax, and one of the things that we talked about last time, and I'll just share this with you if you don't remember. It doesn't really matter whether we have the tax levied on the buyer or the seller. We're going to have exactly the same result. So that was really the lesson that you should have gotten from the end of last lecture, is that it doesn't matter whether you levy the tax on the buyer or the seller from an economic perspective. And that's what we're interested in, is economic perspective on taxes. So even though buyers or sellers for some administrative reason may not want to have the burden of filling out forms and communicating with the government, it doesn't matter who actually does that. The impact on the market is going to be the same in either case. So what I always do, and so let's talk for just a minute. Wombly, you came here, or you just came in. How are you doing, Wombly?
I'm doing good. Sorry, my Wi-Fi wasn't working this morning.
Yeah, that's fine. But we're talking about taxes, and so whenever I introduce the tax levy, I always illustrate it on the seller's side. And the reason I do that is because, one, it doesn't matter. We're going to end up with the same after-tax equilibrium, whether I do it on the buyer's or the seller's side. And for me, I can more clearly understand and see how it is that the tax would be interpreted as a cost to a seller, right? So in this case, Wombly, you see that the tax is $5,
Yes.
right? 5. And so if I'm the seller and every time I sell a unit of the good, I have to pay an extra $5, then that's just going to add to my cost. And we interpret that as just being a shift up by the amount of the $5. So does that make sense to you?
Yes, that actually does.
Yeah, so and it makes sense to me too. So I just add the 5 to the 3, and I get this parallel line, which we called before like our effective supply with the tax. And so what I had called in last lecture PVT, and so that's just going to be 8 plus 2Q QV. So now we can find the after-tax equilibrium. And so why don't you all just spend a minute on that if you haven't already, and then we'll talk about it some more. So after tax equilibrium. And so I'm going to be looking for QT, and then I'm going to be looking for a buyer's after tax price and seller's after tax price. Okay. And I'll just remind us that the amount of the tax in this case is $5 because we're measuring dollars on the vertical axis. Okay, so let's start with German. What did you get for QT, German?
Ooh. I got 8.71.
8.71. So German, yeah. So how did you get that? You want to tell us?
Well, I put 8 plus 2 QV equal to 69 minus 5 QB, and I solved for Q.
Okay, yeah, fine. So and what about you, Wombly? Did you get the same thing, 8.71?
Yeah, like 8.74. Yeah, same thing.
8.7. So and what about you, William? What did you get? 8.7?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, but what's the last?
Oh,
we
8
want to do.
I think it's 8.71.
Okay. Okay. So okay. So you all have your calculators, right? So it should be 69 minus 8, which is 61 divided by 7. 61 divided by 7. So what do you get if you put 61 divided by 7 in your calculator? Andrew. You don't have your hand up, Andrew. So
I lowered it. Yeah, the same 8.71.
well, yeah, but is it 8.71? I don't know. I haven't
Yeah,
done it in my calculator
61
yet.
divided by 7.
Okay.
So sorry, I lowered my hand. I thought.
Okay. Okay. That's fine. Okay. I'm gonna do 61 divided by 7. Yeah, and I get 8.714. Okay, that's fine. That's good. And Brian, what did you get for the buyer's price?
I got a 25.43.
25.43. Now, so in this case, right, if we take the 8.71, we have to plug it back into the our illustration shows us, right, into, if we're going to use the supply curve, we have to use the effective supply curve with the tax. So it's going to be 8 plus 2 times 8.71, and so yeah, I think that looks pretty good to me.
I think the 25.43 might actually be the PVT, and
Oh
21.35.
yeah. Okay, so no, right, and this is kind of like a little bit tricky, and the notation is a little bit weird, and you all will have to kind of forgive me for the odd notation, and it's only because there's no real standard notation for this kind of thing. Okay, to be clear, what we're looking at right now, and so who said they think that that's the wrong thing? I didn't see who talked about it. I just want to explain. Was it you, Brian?
Yeah, I got confused when you said the buyer's tax, but the 25.43
Yeah.
should be the vendor's tax.
So yeah, so look here where the purple dot is, right? we're looking at the intersection here of the original demand curve and the shifted supply curve, right? So where those two intersect, that will be the 25.43, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I say the notation is a little bit, you know, not nice is because I have this as PVT here. And so, yeah, that's true. That's where PVT, the function is crosses the PB, you know, and then I put a little T on it to mean it's like with the tax, right? But the notation down here when I have PVT actually is no longer going to refer to this line. And so, you know, I should probably change the notation just a little bit and do something like, you know, call this one, you know, with tax and with tax. And just so you know that I'm not literally referring to this function, because and then even this kind of language gets a little bit awkward. And I should let you all know something. And so Brian, I was chatting with you, right? So I'll say this. In economics, we have math, and the math is clear. The problem is that we want to use language to describe and give meaning to that math. We're applied mathematicians, but language is less precise than math. So oftentimes you'll see in economics textbooks that you know, economists will clearly lay out a mathematical model of the phenomenon that they're trying to capture. But when they begin to write about it and they use notation, there's kind of like this shift that happens in the language where there ends up being a lot of metaphor and jargon, meaning special ways of using terms within the discipline. And that's what you all are learning. So at this point, it's probably a little bit better to try to rely on the math and then figure out how the language is associated with the elements of the mathematical models and the graphs in particular that you can see. Because if you take the language literally, you'll often be confused. So I don't know if that helps, but is it clear what I'm pointing at and what I mean now, Brian?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what about the and I said this language is unfortunate because when I say the buyer's price with the tax, I'm not really talking about whether the tax is included in the price or not. I'm just talking about once there's a tax in the market, what price will the buyer end up paying for the good? And the PV with the tax doesn't really refer to tax being included or not in the way that you see on your receipt or something like that. It refers to the actual amount that the seller will receive for the good once there's a tax placed on the good. So and this is the next part. So Brian, do you know what the PV with the tax would be?
Would it be 20.43?
Yeah. So the and this is why I put the tax down there, because this is literally what you do is you say, well, a buyer is going to take $25.43 out of their wallet, hand it to the seller, and then the seller is going to take part of that $25, $5 of it, and set it aside for the government, right? And then they're going to keep the remainder, which is going to be the price that they actually receive for their good. So you just subtract the tax off of the buyer's price with the tax. And and this is the point at which normally I tell students, okay, notice that we shifted, and I don't know if you can see this, Brian, I'm going to move this arrow. We shifted the supply curve in order to find the after-tax equilibrium. But really what I want to do is I want to take that shift and illustrate it in the diagram. It's the exact same distance, but I want to put it here because that shows me how I go from this after-tax equilibrium to the seller's after-tax price, what they actually receive. And this sort of diagram, that if I put the distance between them, which is the amount of the tax, in the diagram there, right? So just remember, and hopefully this is clear, I'm being super slow in explaining this, but this distance here, remember, it is equal exactly to the tax, right? So the distance over here is equal to the tax as well. And so can you see that, Brian?
Yeah,
I have the tax there, I have the tax there. And when I illustrate the tax, when I'm constructing the after-tax equilibrium, if I locate it that place in the diagram, it's called a tax wedge diagram. And so sort of the next part that I want to talk about with you all is the only point of putting the effective supply curve in here is so you can locate the proper place on your diagram to illustrate the tax wedge. After that, we don't need this anymore. So I'm gonna shove it over to the right here. It doesn't matter. There's nothing else to be gained in terms of our illustrations from having this information on the diagram. It just clutters the diagram at that point, right? So once we've kind of cleaned things up, we have our tax wedge diagram, and we can have our PV or PBT that we had before. And in that case, it's going to be the 25.43. And then we have the seller's after-tax price, which is our 20.43. And okay. And just to kind of close this off, we create this rectangle here. And this is just kind of like setting up our diagram. That rectangle becomes our revenue rectangle. It's the amount of money collected by the government for the tax. But anyway, so to answer this question, the question number 3 question, right? We want to take the how much the quantity demanded changes if the buyer pays an excise tax of 5. Excise tax is another name for a quantity tax. That's the type of tax that we're illustrating. And so it's just going to be the difference between Q star and QT. So William, what did you get as the answer for number 3?
The answer I got was a 0.7.
Yeah, and again, you want to be a little bit you know, as precise as you can be. That's the answer. Okay. So you see how there's the minus sign there? Because asking for how much did it change, right? And it got reduced by 0.72 units, right? 0.71. Does that make sense, William?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so you can check all these on Ignithium. These are exact same questions again that you guys are going to find on the coming exam. But if you put in a positive answer where it should be negative, you'll get 0 credit. So it's important. And here's one thing I'll say. You know, when you're going to calculate a change is the difference between the end and the beginning. Okay, and in our case, the change is we end up with the after-tax quantity, right? And the presumption is that we started at the pre-tax quantity. So you see why that ends up being a negative number, William?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, and so one of the kind of important issues in this class is, you know, it's super simple, but if you're not careful about calculating change when it asks you for change in the questions, then a lot of times people will you know, presume that change is simply like an absolute value of the magnitude, and they won't actually calculate it. And when we're talking about change, whether it's an increase or a decrease is ambiguous until we supply the negative sign or the positive sign, right? So if I say you're increasing your speed, then how much did your speed change? You're gonna say like I was going from 50 miles an hour to 55 miles an hour. That's 55 minus 5. I increased by 5. But if I say, well, you know, how much did your speed change, right? If you were decelerating, then you know, you started out at 55 and you ended up at 50 because you slowed down. And then I would do 50 minus 55, right? Because that was your original speed, and get a minus 5 miles per hour. So just be careful as you work your way through the problems that you take a note, because oftentimes Ignithium is going to want that kind of precision. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so I saw a little chat from you, Andrew. I don't know if it was something you wanted to talk about, or if it was just a comment.
Oh, yeah, it was just a comment for the end minus beginning, because until now I was trying to, like, I always wrote like 1 or 2 sentences to explain, you know, after looking at the answer, your bio was always negative, you know, like change in. I actually
Yeah.
did include the absolute value stuff, so that's why it resulted in like a couple sentences. But I mean, I'll just use that equation from now. Change equals end minus beginning.
Yeah, right. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad that's helpful. That's what I'm here for. So okay. Now I just want to point out really quickly, and so I'll let you all see. I'm gonna stop sharing this, and then I'm gonna share the version of the problems I'm looking at today. So we just look at question 3, and question 4 is just a related question, but notice that the equations are changed slightly. But now the remaining questions here are 5, 6, 7, and 8. The reason why I decided to work on 3 is because I could see that they were all related, right? So specific tax is another name for an excise tax. It's another name for a quantity tax. So how much do buyers pay for the good? Well, you already have that, and what was the answer, Andrew? Do you remember?
For 3, right? It was negative 0.71.
Well, no, how
Oh,
much
for
do
the okay.
buyers pay for the good?
Let me find it. 25.43.
Yeah, so 25.43, submit, yay. And I put it right in here because a lot of times, again, you'll wonder if your precision was close enough to get the correct answer, and you'll see this yay, correct answer, right? Some of you might just go ahead and look at the hints, and that's okay. But occasionally, and this is the rule of thumb, if the number is ever less than 2, then you've got to be very careful about precision. And so occasionally you'll see a couple questions as we go through the class where the numbers are small. And if you're wondering if your precision is good enough in those cases, then make sure you put it in the answer box here, and you'll end up getting, this will show you what answer Ignithium will record in the database to judge your answer against, okay? And either assign you, if it says yay, it's assigning you a point, right? So you got the right answer. So, you know, precision is your thing, okay? So how much do sellers receive for the good? Again, this is the same model. And let's see. So Wombly, what did you get for that one? Because we already answered it, right?
Yeah, the one that was a negative 0.7, right?
Well,
Oh, how much
look
do
at,
sellers receive? So sellers received the 25.43.
no,
right?
that was what the buyers get,
Oh,
right?
okay, so is it the 21 or no, not that one. The wrong number, sorry.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this really again. So stop share, and then
Yeah, subtract the 5.
yeah. So remember, this is our see, now we've already worked most of this stuff out, right?
Yeah.
So right, so this was our buyer's price 25.43, our seller's price we said was 20.43. And again, you should all have this diagram now that we've constructed it, because since we've constructed this diagram, now we'll be able to answer most of the questions. That's what I'm showing here as you guys work through your homework, that you know, if you pay attention to what's happening with the questions, in, you know, you fully illustrate one good tax wedge diagram, you'll be able to answer most of the questions. So yeah, so this one should be 20.43, and we submit, and okay, we got the right answer. Okay. And so what's the buyer's tax burden? Well, that's something we haven't really talked about yet. And I'll go back to the diagram. Now, tax burden, I've assigned you all a couple of videos, and some of the videos are preliminary videos from principles of microeconomics that discuss tax burden, because this is a concept that if you had me for principles of microeconomics, you'd be familiar with, and it's in a lot of principles textbooks. So the definition of tax burden is how the tax is divided between the two participants, and how you see that on the diagram is, and so let me talk to somebody. So let's say, how about Jeffrey Lee? How are you doing, Jeffrey?
I'm doing all right. Hi.
Hi. So you can see our diagram. This is our tax wedge diagram. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the idea of tax burden or not. Are you familiar with the idea?
Not really. It's like
Okay.
who suffers more from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you're using the dinner table definition of tax,
Yeah.
of burden, right? So you're saying like, yeah, but it is kind of a notion of somehow really what we're trying to say is, okay, there's a tax on the good. Who pays for that tax? And it's different from consumer and producer surplus and the change of consumer producer surplus, but it's really on like a per unit basis who actually pays for the tax. And so what we do is we compare it to their pre-tax price for the good. So remember our and I assume you can see it here. I'll show you. So this is our market equilibrium without the tax. Can you see why I'm illustrating that orange point there?
Mhm. Yep.
That's our pre-tax equilibrium. And so we don't have it illustrated over here yet, but that gave us our pre-tax price. So before there was any tax introduced in this market, both the buyer and the seller the buyer was paying $21.82 for the good. And actually I want to do that in like pink just to make it different. $21.82 for the good before there was any tax introduced. And so now the buyer is paying $25.43. And I don't know if you can see this, but remember the tax wedge is the distance here. I don't know if you can see this distance here is a tax wedge. And that's exactly the distance between $25 and $20. It's the amount of the tax. This distance vertically is 5. Can you see that?
Yeah, I see that.
Right. And what the original equilibrium price does, if we were to illustrate it, right, is it breaks that distance into 2 pieces. So it divides the tax between the buyer and the seller. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. But in terms of the calculation, what we're doing for the buyer's burden is we're taking the difference between the buyer's after-tax price and the original price they paid, the original equilibrium price. And for the seller's burden, we're taking the seller's after-tax price and the price they received before the tax was introduced. It's that distance there, right? So that's the definition of buyer's burden and seller's burden. So the buyer's burden would be $25.43 minus $21.82. And so I'll let you all make the calculation really quickly. Okay, calculate the buyer's burden and the seller's burden. And when you add them together, they equal the amount of the tax. Because you're just splitting the $5 between the two of them, right? And then we'll go ahead and answer those questions, okay? So once you all have calculated the buyer's and the seller's burden, go ahead and raise your hand, because I'm going to move back to the other screen and we're going to answer those couple of questions. I see 1 hand up, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Keontae, are you working on it? How are you doing, German? Hung? Jeffrey?
Professor, I just back. So what we're going to do?
What was that, Hung?
I just coming back. So like what we going
Yeah,
ahead.
you're calculating the buyers and the sellers burden of the tax. But if you weren't listening, you probably can't do it right now. You just have to follow along with the rest of us. So, and what about you, Tommy? And Jeffrey, did you get it yet?
I'm still looking at it, Professor.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. Okay, so let's go back then, because it seems like most of you have gotten it. Oh, okay. Hi, Keontae, you're outside. Okay, so I will stop sharing and I will share again. And so what's the buyer's tax burden? Did you all get 3.6?
Yes.
Yes.
Anybody get something different? No. And so what's the seller's tax burden? Jeffrey Lee.
I got 1.4.
Yeah, right. And so you can see what's going on behind the scenes is there's a little bit of rounding error. And that's okay. Don't worry about it. It shouldn't cause you any problem again, unless the numbers are really, really small. But yeah, so once we have the buyer's burden, we have the seller's burden, and you know, we're getting the correct response. Okay. So then I just want to point out really quickly, and we can still talk about these questions next week. But if you go back and you reflect on the lectures that I've asked you all to watch for today and what we did last time, then we can easily calculate the amount of consumer surplus, the amount of producer surplus, the amount of tax revenue, and the deadweight loss. And then the change in consumer surplus. This one's a little bit more tricky because it's asking you again to calculate the change. So you have to do that carefully. And the change in total surplus. And you all may remember, but I told you before that net social benefit is just another name for total surplus. So you'll notice that these questions are near twins of one another. So I'll kind of leave you all with those thoughts, and I'll stop sharing this. And one more time, I will share the whiteboard. And then again, everything else that we're being asked for is just these areas here, and then comparison from the regular consumer producer surplus. And I'll tell you one other thing I'm going to do really quickly. Since you all have this illustration, I'm going to go back to Ignithium, and I'm going to open these hints so you all can check your work. So that's the consumer surplus, the producer surplus, the tax revenue, the deadweight loss. And I do want to, you know, show you something here. So now this is an example where we have a number that's less than 2. And sometimes there you can run into issues with precision and rounding error. So just be careful. You won't be able to hear do it, but maybe I can show you for a minute. If I put in, we know the answer is 1.8. If I put in 1.75, I'm still getting the right answer. And now I'm too far off. Okay. So, yeah, you know, in other cases, you could be off by a 10th and it's a small percentage of a big number like 20 and it won't matter. But once the number gets to be around 2, then the precision gets tighter. So you want to be careful about that. And how much does consumer surplus change? You can see that answer. How much does producer surplus change? You can see that answer. And with a specific tax, how much the total surplus change? I'll show you that one. And I'm going to keep number 16 hidden, and you all can figure that one out on your own. Okay. So there's stop share, and I'll stop the